The Last Samurai, movie versus history. The movie Last Samurai follows the story of Captain Nathan Algren, an American soldier brought to Japan to help train and modernize the country's army. The film takes place during a period of major social and political changes as Japan attempts to shed its feudal past and enter the modern era. Like any historical film inspired by real events, The Last Samurai takes certain artistic liberties. Therefore, in this narrative, we will explore what in the film is fictional and what were the actual historical circumstances and figures that gave life to this epic tale. In the film The Last Samurai, the narrator Simon Graham says that Japan was born of the sword, when the ancient gods dipped a coral blade into the ocean. As they pulled it out, 4 perfect drops fell back into the sea and became the Japanese islands. According to Japanese myths and legends, however, it wasn't a sword, but a spear that was dipped into the ocean, specifically a gem-adorned naginata named Ame no Nuboko, meaning heavenly jeweled spear. This weapon was wielded by the gods Izanagi and Izanami, siblings who descended from the heavens to shape the chaotic earth into a habitable world. From the bridge between heaven and earth, they looked upon the chaos of the sea below. Izanagi plunged the spear into the ocean, and the drops that fell back into the sea after being lifted formed the first island, Onogoro. Izanagi and Izanami descended to this island, built a palace hall, and held their wedding ceremony. From their union were born the 8 great islands of Japan, as well as many other gods. The filmmakers likely replaced the spear with a sword because it is more commonly associated with samurai, even though samurai frequently used the naginata before it was later replaced by the yari spear. In the Last Samurai movie, Nathan Algren is an American captain and Civil War veteran hired to train the Imperial Japanese Army in Western military tactics. During his time in Japan, he is captured by samurai, eventually bonds with them, and adopts their culture and values. He ultimately becomes their ally in the fight against modernization and the government's official army. Despite their bravery, the samurai are defeated. In reality, no person named Nathan Algren ever joined the rebel samurai in Japan. Although Algren, played by Tom Cruise in the film, was not based on a real person, he was inspired by a real French artillery captain named Jules Brunet, known for his involvement in the Boshin War from 1868 to 1869. The Boshin War was a conflict between the Tokugawa shogunate and factions supporting the emperor and modernization. The war arose from discontent among nobles and young samurai who opposed the Tokugawa shogunate's inability to respond to societal and economic changes in Japan. Jules Brunet was born on January 2, 1838 in France. He was trained at a military academy and completed his education at the artillery school in Metz. Shortly after graduation, Brunet served as a sub-lieutenant in the Horse Artillery Regiment of the Imperial Guard during the French invasion of Mexico, staying until its conclusion in 1867. He was promoted to artillery captain and knighted in the Legion of Honor. He was then sent to Japan as part of a French military mission tasked with modernizing the Tokugawa shogunate's army to European standards. Brunet and other French officers trained the shogunate's troops for about a year until the outbreak of the Boshin War, when the French government ordered the mission to leave Japan. However, Brunet chose to remain and support the shogunate against the imperial faction. In 1868 to 1869, the Battle of Hakodate took place on the island of Hokkaido, where the shogunate's 3,000 troops were defeated by 7,000 imperial soldiers. The imperial government sought Brunet and other foreign advisors, but they managed to escape from Hokkaido and return to France. The new Japanese government demanded that Brunet be punished for his involvement in the war, but his actions garnered public support in France, and the request was denied. He faced only mild consequences and was allowed to continue his military career, eventually reaching the rank of general. At the beginning of the film, The Last Samurai, Nathan Algren arrives in Japan to train the newly formed imperial army, tasked with suppressing a samurai rebellion against the new emperor. During training, Algren discovers that the imperial soldiers are merely conscripted peasants with poor discipline and no experience, barely able to fire their weapons. In reality, Japan in 1870 already had a well-trained army that used firearms. In both the Boshin War and the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, which inspired the Last Samurai movie, imperial forces were led by seasoned soldiers, many of whom were former samurai. In contrast, the rebels were often undisciplined men who the imperial army could easily defeat. Although the samurai in film view firearms as dishonorable and avoid technological advancement, in reality, samurai had embraced gunpowder more than 300 years before the film's events. A matchlock firearm called the Tanegashima was introduced to Japan in 1543 through trade with Portugal. Japanese armorers eventually manufactured it in large quantities, allowing warlords to train large armies composed of commoners. The weapons were highly effective and easy to use, becoming the primary battlefield weapon alongside traditional bows, yumi, and spears, yari. By the end of the 16th century, Japan had more firearms than many European nations. When the Satsuma Rebellion took place, all the rebelling samurai had access to firearms and used swords and spears as backup weapons when they ran out of ammunition. Samurai were not foolish enough to charge into enemies armed with rifles and cannons using only melee weapons. That would be like attacking a minefield in broad daylight. To be fair, there was an extremist Shinto organization of former samurai in the 19th century named Kei-Shinto, which resisted Western influence and sought to eliminate modern practices, including Western clothing, the Gregorian calendar, and firearms. The group was also angered by the loss of class privileges after the Meiji reforms. On October 24, 1876, they led an attack on the imperial army and killed dozens of soldiers and government officials in Kumamoto Prefecture. The imperial army crushed Kei-Shinto by the next morning. Most surviving rebels committed seppuku, ritualistic suicide by disembowelment. The rest were captured and executed. Moritsugu Katsumoto, portrayed by Ken Watanabe in the Last Samurai movie, is the leader of a samurai faction that resists Japan's modernization, striving to preserve traditional samurai values and way of life. Like Nathan Algren, Katsumoto is a fictional character, but he was inspired by a real historical figure. Saigo Takamori, a prominent samurai and military leader, often considered the last true samurai. When Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu resigned in November 1867 and power was restored to the emperor, Saigo was one of the most vocal and uncompromising opponents of the negotiated settlement. He demanded that the Tokugawa clan be stripped of its land and special status. His uncompromising stance was one of the key reasons the Boshin War erupted. During this conflict, Saigo led imperial forces at the Battle of Toba Fushimi and later commanded the army that accepted the surrender of Edo from Katsu Kaishu. After the imperial victory, Saigo became a prominent figure in the new government and initially supported modernization reforms. However, he later opposed aspects of rapid modernization, believing Japan should not open itself to Western trade and expressing resistance to building railways. He insisted that government funds should go toward military upgrades and advocated for a war against Korea, which had refused to recognize Emperor Meiji's legitimacy. Other Japanese leaders strongly opposed this idea, citing budget concerns and Japan's relative weakness compared to Western powers. In protest, Saigo resigned from all government positions and returned to his hometown of Kagoshima, where in 1874 he founded a system of private schools, Shigako, employing former samurai who had also resigned from army and police roles. The institutions trained students in weapons and military tactics. Over time, these samurai came to control Kagoshima's local government. Fearing a rebellion by these well-trained and determined warriors, the central government sent warships to Kagoshima to confiscate weapons and ammunition from the armory. Tensions were already high due to the cancellation of samurai rice stipends, and the arrival of government troops escalated the situation into an open rebellion, the Satsuma Rebellion. Though initially reluctant, Saigo eventually agreed to lead the rebels against the imperial government. He fought 2 major battles with the imperial army, both of which he lost. His remaining forces retreated as imperial troops relentlessly pursued them. Eventually, Saigo and his last samurai were surrounded and killed at the Battle of Shiroyama. The Last Samurai movie romanticizes this story, with Katsumoto portrayed like Saigo as a charismatic and heroic leader striving to defend his values and culture from modernization and Western influence. In the climactic battle of the Last Samurai, the Imperial army uses a Gatling gun to devastating effect, mowing down the samurai in a brutal display of modern military efficiency. The Gatling gun, one of the first rapid-fire weapons, had several rotating barrels powered by a hand crank, enabling it to fire bullets in rapid succession. Although the Gatling gun was invented in 1861 and could have theoretically appeared on an 1870s battlefield, there is no evidence that such weapons were used during the actual Battle of Shiroyama. While a final suicidal charge by the last surviving samurai did occur, it was likely on foot rather than on horseback. During the Battle of Shiroyama, which took place on a hill in Kagoshima, Saigo and his 500 followers faced off against a vastly larger imperial army of about 30,000 soldiers. Supported by 5 warships stationed in Kagoshima Bay, Imperial artillery began bombarding the rebels' positions on September 24, 1877. When Saigo refused to surrender, Imperial forces launched a full-scale assault. By 6 a.m. the next morning, only 40 samurai were still alive, and Saigo Takamori was seriously wounded. Legend says that one of his closest aides helped him perform seppuku. After Saigo's death, the remaining samurai drew their swords and charged down the hill toward imperial positions, seeking an honorable death in battle. By 7 a.m., all Satsuma samurai had perished, marking the end of both the Satsuma Rebellion and the era of the samurai. In the samurai village where a wounded Nathan Algren recovers, everyone is shown eating fluffy white rice. In reality, Japan's peasant population rarely ate white rice, as it was used to pay taxes. Eating it would have been akin to consuming one's own money. Only the wealthiest Japanese ate white rice regularly. Rural samurai were more likely to eat barley, wheat, or millet grains, often prepared as porridge with herbs. Peasants commonly foraged for food in the form of wild plants, including tubers, bark, acorns, edible grasses, berries, beans, seeds, and nuts. They also consumed locusts, crickets, worms, and other insects, often boiled with herbs like parsley, cayenne, ginger, marjoram, sage, dill, anise, and fennel. During a conversation with Nathan Algren, Katsumoto claims that he and his ancestors have protected their people for over 900 years. This is inaccurate. Samurai began as rent collectors and estate enforcers for Kyoto aristocrats, gaining true political power only at the end of the 12th century. Only during the Mongol invasions were samurai seen as national defenders, when clans united against a common enemy. Although samurai were a noble warrior class, they did not always act nobly. They wielded power and wealth, but with modernization, they lost their social status. The peasant class, long exploited by samurai, rose to their level. The main motivation behind the rebellion was the desire to preserve samurai power and privilege and to restore the old order. In the Last Samurai movie, the lines between good and evil are drawn clearly. The samurai are portrayed as noble heroes, while the imperial soldiers and advocates of modernization are cast as villains. In reality, however, the Boshin War, on which the film is loosely based, was not a conflict of good versus evil, but rather a clash of two competing visions for Japan's future. On one side stood the Tokugawa shogunate, which sought to preserve stability and traditional values. On the other, the imperial faction, which pursued rapid modernization and reform to make Japan a competitive peer to Western powers. People on both sides had legitimate beliefs and motivations shaped by the context of the time. For example, during its rule, the Tokugawa shogunate ensured relative peace and stability in Japan and presided over a flourishing of culture, including tea ceremonies, calligraphy, and kabuki theatre. From their perspective, preserving these traditions was a worthy cause. However, what they failed to grasp was that Japan's isolationist policies had led to stagnation in science, technology, and the economy. The feudal system also stifled social mobility and economic growth, creating dissatisfaction among various social classes. Meanwhile, the imperial forces aimed to modernize Japan's economy, military, and political systems following Western models, sparking rapid technological and economic development. They also wanted to open Japan to the world, enriching the country through trade and cultural exchange. But this transformation was not without its costs. The transition to a modern state brought violent upheaval, including the Boshin War, which caused immense suffering. Moreover, the swift modernization led to the erosion of traditional values and ways of life, which was especially painful for the samurai, who lost their social standing and means of livelihood. The film portrays the emperor as indecisive, naive, and easily manipulated, but this depiction is far from the truth. Emperor Meiji was, in fact, a capable and strategic leader. He transformed Japan from an isolated feudal society into a powerful industrialized nation modeled after the West. The film refers to him as Emperor Meiji, a title given posthumously. His real name was Mutsuhito, and during his lifetime, he was referred to simply as the Emperor. Contrary to the film's depiction, he did not speak English, and no one besides his highest advisors would have been permitted to see him without an invitation. Rather than being controlled by others, Emperor Meiji was a strong political figure who played an active role in shaping the policies of his country. One of the film's historical inaccuracies is more light-hearted. In a conversation, Algren tells Katsumoto about the Battle of Thermopylae, where he claims 300 brave Greeks held off a Persian army of 1 million men for 2 days, inflicting heavy losses and demoralizing the enemy. Later, Katsumoto asks what happened to the warriors, and Algren solemnly replies that they all died. This version contains several inaccuracies. In reality, the Greek force at Thermopylae numbered over 7,000 men, led by King Leonidas V of Sparta. On the Persian side, while ancient sources claimed up to 4 million troops, modern historians estimate the actual number was between 120,000 and 300,000. The Greeks held the pass for 3 days, not 2. When Leonidas learned that they had been betrayed and encircled, he convened a war council and told his allies they could retreat if they wished. Many did, but about 2,000 warriors stayed behind, including Leonidas and his royal guard of Helots, as well as Thespians and Thebans, who formed a rear guard to delay the Persian advance and allow others to escape. So, no, the Greeks at Thermopylae did not all die to the last man. And that concludes our look at the historical inaccuracies in The Last Samurai movie. What surprised you the most? Did we miss any major ones? And how much do you enjoy this historical epic from director Edward Zwick, despite its creative liberties? Let us know in the comments.